The grand courtroom was filled with a low hum. Damp carpeted aisles, shadows cast by heavy curtains covering the windows, and the steady procession of judges walking solemnly to their seats. Everything was, as it always had been, by custom. But today there was a palpable tension in the air, like a storm cloud hanging overhead. Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General, was ready for this moment. She had prepared for a long time, but what she was about to do had the potential to change the course of history. She had gathered all her strength to collect evidence that would lift the veil on many secrets hidden within the U.S. judicial system. Pam stood before the Supreme Court, gazing intently at the building. This was her chance to prove that even in the highest circles of power, there was room for justice. There was no fear on her face. She was confident. In her hands was power, the power to change the course of events. She passed through the metal doors and submitted the documents to the court clerks. Everything seemed unchanged, but Pam felt her confidence and resolve grow with each step. She knew this wouldn't be an easy task. But this was her shot. As she entered the courtroom, all the judges and lawyers present turned their attention to her. Pam felt it, and although her heart raced, she managed to keep her composure. Among the audience was John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the United States. His face betrayed no emotion, but Pam noticed how he intently watched every movement she made. He was the one she had to convince. "Pam Bondi," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You have 2 minutes to present your evidence. Will you speak now?" All eyes were on her. She knew that these few minutes could change everything. "Honorable Court," she began, her voice firm but slightly strained. "I am not here simply to make a request. I am here to uncover the truth. The truth about how some of the most important decisions in this court were made. I have evidence indicating that John Roberts, Chief Justice of the United States, violated the fundamentals of justice by making decisions in his personal interests." These words rang out like thunder. The entire room fell into silence. Pam saw John Roberts look as though he had been struck, but his face remained unchanged. She knew she didn't have time to reflect and continued. "I have documents showing that the decisions you made were not impartial. They were made under the pressure of external influences. I have evidence that certain Supreme Court justices received financial benefits for specific rulings. I have documents linking these decisions to financial flows passing through offshore companies." Pam took a breath and looked at Roberts. She saw his gaze cloud over, but he didn't stop her. "These are serious accusations," he replied. "Do you understand that you are putting the reputation of this court at risk?" "I understand," Pam replied firmly, her voice growing stronger. "But justice is more important than reputation, and I am here to defend just that." Roberts closed his notes and glanced at the other justices. He knew he was facing a difficult decision, but he also knew that the situation he was in could destroy not just him, but the very system he had been overseeing. "Are you trying to accuse me of corruption?" His voice was cold, but there was a clear tremor of nerves creeping in. He could no longer remain calm. "I'm not accusing you, John," Pam replied, her words calm but deep. "I'm simply asking you to answer these questions before the people. This is not just about your reputation. It's about our justice." A silence fell over the courtroom. Everyone was waiting to see how Roberts would react. How would he respond to these accusations? And what would happen to him and the system if the truth came to light? One uncertain, thrilling thought lingered. What will happen next? The court session took place in a silence that was almost tangible. A tense calm prevailed in the Supreme Court room. The judges were composed, ready for an important decision, but uncertainty still hung in the air. Ms. Bondi, a representative of the legal department, sat in the front row, observing every movement of the judges. Her eyes were closed from the tension, but when her gaze stopped on Judge Roberts, she felt her heart quicken. This was the moment she had been waiting for. the moment when she had to make the final step in the complex and murky political world. "I ask you, Your Honor, to think about the consequences of this decision," Ms. Bondi said, raising her hand to the microphone. Her voice was calm, but there was a strength in it that could change the course of events. John Roberts, Chief Justice of the United States, did not rush to reply. His face was neutral, and it was hard to guess what he was feeling. It seemed as though he was hesitating, weighing all the for and against, considering all the legal nuances. But then, in the same silence that filled the room, came the words that would change everything. "Release," he declared clearly. "This is not just a legal issue, it is a moral one." The story that had begun a few weeks ago was now coming to a close at the highest level. But the release Robert spoke of was not what everyone had expected. Megan, the waitress from the cafe whom Jacob Reed had seen the previous week, sat in the corner, watching closely. She was one of those who had observed internal politics for years and knew how seriously such decisions could impact the fates of individuals. But now, her thoughts were on the other side. Could she find her way in a world where politics and justice merged into one unclear and complicated game? The session was interrupted when one of the judges stood up. "Your Honor," he addressed Roberts, "we cannot afford to take a step back. This decision opens a dangerous precedent." But Roberts remained steadfast. "If we do not allow ourselves to be corrected, we will not fulfill our role as protectors of constitutional rights," he replied, his voice cold and firm. Meanwhile, in the court's corridors, a real storm was unfolding. Lawyers from all sides were negotiating heavily, trying to learn more about the decision that was about to change the balance of power. Far from the courtroom, in a local cafe, Jacob Reed couldn't shake the feeling that this case had to be connected to him. Many of his thoughts about justice, honesty, and truth returned to the moment when he was weighing all the pros and cons of making a decision that would not only change the business, but also impact the lives of thousands of people. All his thoughts suddenly stopped when he received a message from one of the high-ranking officials from Washington. They agreed to meet, and this meeting was to be key for the next actions. Meanwhile, Ms. Bondi continued to monitor the progress of the case. She knew that this was more than just a legal decision. It was an issue that opened the possibility for more significant changes in the country's legal system. She was experiencing a tough internal struggle. On one hand, she felt that her actions could be the catalyst for significant changes in the country's political landscape. On the other hand, she also knew how difficult it would be to escape this game without leaving destruction in her wake. The next day, everyone expected Roberts to announce the final decision that would change not only the political situation, but also the lives of many people. And that's when Jacob Reed, a man who had earned a reputation due to his willingness to act, felt that his place was where it all started. He was meant to open new opportunities for those who wanted to walk the path of change. And so, when he stood in the courtroom, his gaze met Roberts'. At that moment, everything that had come before seemed insignificant. The whole thing was about finding the right moment for the next step. The time for action has come. Roberts' decision, which had seemed unchangeable, now sparked a real storm among the political elites. Everyone had expected him to merely confirm the already set course, but his final word was a blow. The entire courtroom fell silent. People in the gallery, journalists, even the most devoted supporters of political parties were left stunned by his statement. "This is not just a legal decision. This is a political choice," he repeated, but his voice became even more resolute. "And I cannot ignore the consequences." He lifted his head, surveying those present, and for a moment, his gaze met Ms. Bondi's. In her eyes burned something more than just surprise. It was understanding, but also fear. Outside the courtroom, real political intrigue unfolded. Just a few minutes after the announcement, all phone lines were occupied. Every politician, every key figure was trying to get an answer. Had Judge Roberts, with his reputation for stability and balance, decided not only to change the legal landscape, but also open the door to new, unpredictable events? Jacob Reed, at that moment, was on the other side of the country. He felt that the real struggle was just beginning. His place was no longer in the small cafe where he had been thoughtfully reviewing letters from politicians. Now he had to be at the very heart of this raging ocean of change. All the moves he had made up to this point seemed like mere preparation for what lay ahead. And now, when he realized that the final decision rested in Robert's hands, he could no longer stay at home. But when he arrived at the important meeting, he felt uneasy. The same high-ranking official from Washington, whom he was supposed to meet, was too calm. Too calm for it not to cause him a feeling of anxiety. All his efforts were directed at keeping the situation under control, but there was a shadow of doubt in his gaze. "Do you understand that we are all on the edge now?" he asked, looking at Jacob. "This is not just a dispute between politicians. This is a fight for the future of the country." Jacob didn't answer. The only question in his mind was, "Am I strong enough for this?" Meanwhile, in the courtroom, the tension reached its peak. Ms. Bondi increasingly felt that her time in the political arena was limited. Her position was becoming more vulnerable. The case had long ceased to be just a legal matter. It had become almost a personal challenge. Like Roberts, she stood at a threshold from which there was no return. And the more she thought about her role, the more she felt that even this struggle could be lost. Not legally, not even politically, but morally. An hour after Robert's decision, another important meeting took place on the streets of Washington. Megan, the waitress Jacob had noticed a few weeks ago, was at the very heart of the new political game. She received an unexpected call from the same high-ranking official who had contacted Reed. He told her about a plan that could change everything. She needed to make an important decision and therefore also act on the edge. All these threads wove together, and every move now mattered. Everyone was on the edge: politicians, lawyers, ordinary people who, just a few weeks ago, couldn't have imagined that their fate would become part of this game. Now everyone had a choice: to take the risk and try to change the course of events, or leave everything as it was, paying for it. And no matter how it sounded, Jacob Reed understood. For him, this moment was decisive. If he lost, he would lose everything. But if he won, everything would change. "It's time to act," he thought, dialing the phone number again. Robert sat in his office, seemingly alone, but the pressure he felt was so great that he couldn't believe this was happening to him. His last decision was changing everything, and it seemed to even affect his own inner world. He was no longer just a judge making decisions based on the law. Now he was part of a game where every move, every glance could be lost. Behind the doors of his office, a whole army of people had gathered: party consultants, lawyers, political strategists. For 3 hours, they discussed the possible consequences. But Roberts remained silent. He heard nothing except the voice of his own thoughts. It seemed that with each word in his head, the situation only became more complicated. "Roberts, do you realize that your decision is now under serious question?" One of the advisors finally broke the silence. "Everything we've been building depends on you." But this was no longer something that could scare him. This was the choice he had made, and now all that was left was to feel the consequences. Meanwhile, Jacob, who had become a key figure in this political battle, stepped outside. Everything seemed so familiar, but with every step, he became more aware that the world around him was no longer what he had imagined. His phone rang incessantly, each call from someone important trying to find out what he was going to do next. And each one gave him no answers. "Jacob, if you don't take this step, it might be the last one." "You know you're on the edge," warned Megan, her voice coming through the phone. "We're all hanging by a thread. You can help, or you can lose everything, even yourself." There were no extra emotions in her words, but he felt the weight of the situation. He had one last chance to take this game to a new level. But was he really ready for all the losses it would bring? At the moment when Jacob reached the old administrative building in the center of the city, he realized that this was not just a building. It was an arena where his future would be decided. And here he met the one who stood on the other side of the barricades, Ms. Bondi. In her eyes was the same question he had been asking himself over the past few days. "We've known for a long time that every step comes at a cost, Jacob. Are you ready for what may happen?" she asked, but her voice sounded quite different than before. He raised his gaze and replied, deep in his heart feeling that this was the question he would have to answer. "This is no longer a question of readiness. It's a question of survival. And I choose to fight," he said. Those few words changed everything. They became a signal for the beginning of a new, much larger game, where every step, every decision would change everything. There was no room for compromise anymore. It was a fight for every inch of political territory. And now everyone in Washington knew. This battle was no longer about legal manipulations or political intrigues. It was a war for the future of the country, and everyone involved had already been drawn in to the very end. Meanwhile, in the shadows of political corridors, another plan was starting to gain strength. It was the last card being played by the great political force. If Roberts didn't yield, if he didn't become part of their plan, a new source of pressure would be opened, one that could shake the very foundations of his decision. And so each moment was approaching its climax, where all the stakes were on the line. While politicians prepared for the next round, Jacob and Ms. Bondi stood on the threshold of a future that promised more than just a political victory. They had already become part of a machine that would not rest until it had everything it wanted. "Now we have to play for real," whispered Megan, as she walked down the corridor, not knowing what would come next. The time had come for everyone to choose their side. The next morning brought a quiet tension that preceded the storm. Robert sat at his desk, reviewing the documents that had now become not just work-related issues, but his life. Opening the next folder, he saw a signature he hadn't noticed before. It was a document that called into question all of his previous steps. All these days he had believed he was in control of the situation, but now he understood. Everything had been set up before he made his choice. His phone buzzed again, and he saw a message from Megan. "We're one step away from losing everything. You need to act immediately." Roberts walked up to the window and looked at the city. It seemed to him that he was caught in an endless cycle of struggle where victory was impossible. In that moment, he realized he no longer had the right to choose. He would have to take a risk, otherwise everything he had achieved would fall apart. Meanwhile, Jacob and Ms. Bondi were also facing uncertainty. They had learned that the final move they had placed great hopes on wasn't just ignored, it had been used against them. All their efforts had been in vain. They found themselves trapped by the very snare they had set for themselves, and now every move they made was controlled by those who had more resources and influence. But then, during the final meeting in a cozy office, Ms. Bondi voiced what they both had feared to say out loud. "We won't be able to endure this, Jacob. They've already taken everything they could, and now they're going for the rest. We have to move forward or it's all lost." "What if we just knock them down?" Jacob asked, feeling his heart race. And that moment became the last and most difficult in their fight. It was a decision that stopped their hearts for a second. They could act without looking back, not even realizing that their worst fears might become reality. But within hours, it became clear that the game was over. And even though they hadn't finished their battle, it didn't matter. They had lost. Epilogue. A few weeks after the events that had changed everything, Robert stepped out of the shadow he had created. But now he knew he no longer controlled the game. All those years, he had been part of a vast political machine, and by the time he decided to stop, they had already won. Not through force or cunning, but because he had allowed them into his game. Jacob left everything he once considered his, and now stood at the threshold of a new life, feeling nothing but disappointment. Bondi disappeared as quickly as she had appeared, leaving only the echoes of what could have been a victory. The game was over, but could they return? Was there any decision that could have changed the course of events? That would remain unknown, as behind every step there is always a dark side, where every decision comes with its price. And who is willing to pay it?